Today, we spend the hour with the journalist at the center of one of the most significant press freedom cases in decades, veteran New York Times investigative reporter James Rosen. In 2006, Rosen won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting about warrantless wiretapping by the National Security Agency. His story would have come out right before the 2004 presidential election of President Bush over John Kerry. It might have changed the outcome of that election. But under government pressure, the New York Times refused to publish the story for more than a year, until James Rosen was publishing a book that would have had the revelations in it. He's since been pursued by both the Bush and Obama administrations in a 6-year leak investigation into that book, State of War, The Secret History of the CIA and the Bush administration. James Rosen now faces years in prison if he refuses to testify at the trial of a former CIA officer accused of giving him classified information. In June, the Supreme Court turned down his appeal of a court ruling forcing him to testify in the criminal trial of ex-CIA analyst Jeffrey Sterling, who prosecutors believe gave him information on the agency's role in disrupting Iran's nuclear program. In State of War, Rosen showed that instead of hampering Iran's efforts, the CIA effectively gave Iran a blueprint for designing a bomb. James Rosen has vowed to go to jail rather than testify at Sterling's trial, which is set to begin in January. In a story broadcast Sunday, General Michael Hayden, who led the CIA until 2009, and before that led the NSA, told Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes he does not think Rosen should be forced to divulge his source.
I'm conflicted. I know the damage that is done, and I do, but I also know the free press necessity in a free society. And it actually might be that I think, no, he's wrong. That was a mistake. That was a terrible thing to do. America will suffer because of that story. But then I have to think about, so how do I redress that? And if the method of redressing that actually harms the broad freedom of the press, that's still wrong. The government needs to be strong enough to keep me safe, but I don't want it so strong that it threatens my liberties.
Well, the Obama administration must now decide if it will try to force James Rosen's testimony and risk sending one of the nation's most prominent national security journalists to jail. President Obama has already developed a reputation as the most aggressive in history when it comes to targeting whistleblowers. His Justice Department has brought 8 cases so far, more than all previous administrations combined. On Friday, federal prosecutors hinted they may decide not to press for Rosen's testimony under new guidelines issued earlier this year that make it harder to subpoena journalists for their records. James Rosen's answer to this saga has been to write another book. Released today, it's titled Pay Any Price, Greed, Power, and Endless War. He writes the book as his answer to how, quote, to best challenge the government's draconian efforts to crack down on aggressive investigative reporting and suppress the truth in the name of ceaseless war. James Rosen, welcome back to Democracy Now!
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you with us.
Thanks. So
your new book is Pay Any Price, Greed, Power, and Endless War. You're quoting John Kennedy here.
Yes, yes. And I think that's what we have done since 9/11. We've paid an enormous price in the name of what we started this war after 9/11, this global war on terror, in order to seek justice or retribution or however you want to characterize the attitude of America right after 9/11. But today it's become essentially a search for cash, and there's lots of people involved in the war on terror today who are doing it because they're ambitious, because they want status or power or money. And I think of it kind of in the historical sense. The historical context is kind of like in the Middle Ages when you had the 30 Years' War or the 100 Years' War in Europe, where you developed a whole new class of mercenary soldiers who all they did their entire careers is go from one country to another to fight wars for money.
Well, as you expose a great deal in Pay Any Price, you yourself are under, as I just documented, enormous pressure.
Right.
How do you continue to write these front-page pieces for the New York Times, write this book, Pay Any Price, as you face the possibility of years in jail?
Well, it's what I do. It's my job. It's it's what keeps me sane is to keep going. If I just gave in to them, then then I would be failing in what I want to do. I want to keep finding out the truth. It's the thing I've tried to do my whole life is be a reporter and be a writer. It's the only thing I know how to do.
Well, in a moment, we're going to talk extensively about these stunning revelations and Pay Any Price. But if you could go back to what you revealed before Edward Snowden, and how it eventually came into the New York Times that won it and you a Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah. Well, I guess you mean the original NSA stories. We in 2004. Eric Lichtblau and I had a number of different sources who began to tell us early on in 2004 that they knew something really big. They knew the biggest secret in the government, but they couldn't tell us because they were so nervous. They were very tortured by what they knew, and it took months of kind of patience and talking and reporting for Eric and I to figure out exactly what it was that they were talking about. And finally, we were able to piece it all together. And in the fall of 2004, we had the story ready to go. I had a great confrontation over the telephone with Michael Hayden, who you just saw, where I read him that I got him on the phone kind of by bluffing the PR person at the NSA and said, I need to talk to him right now. And I was shocked. He got on the phone and I read him the top of the draft of the story and he goes, and that's when I knew we had it. And so we had the story ready, but then then Hayden and the government started to crack down on the New York Times and pressured them to hold the story till, even though it was ready about 2 or 3 weeks before the election in mid-October 2004. And then after the election...
Well, wait, can you just explain, what does it mean when the government pressures, the leading newspaper in the United States? What does that look like? Do they march through the offices of the New York Times into Bill Keller, the executive editor's office?
No, well, usually what they ask is for us to go to them. The first meeting was between... I think it was in probably early October, late September of 2004, between me and the Washington bureau chief at the time, Phil Taubman, and John McLaughlin, who was then the acting CIA director, and his chief of staff, John Mosman. And we met at the CIA director's downtown office at the old executive office building. And it was a very funny meeting because at that time, they didn't want to acknowledge that the story was right. They didn't want to officially acknowledge. And so they had all these we had this very weird hypothetical conversation where they kept saying, well, if you were to, if the government was doing what you say they were doing, it would be very bad for you to reveal that. and then that was just the beginning of a whole series of meetings with the editors and us, the reporters, in which they said that this is the crown jewel of the U.S. counterterrorism operation, and that if you reveal this, this will damage national security. And so that was essentially the argument that they used then, and they used throughout the entire process.
Well, it went higher than you and the Washington editor.
It kept going higher and higher and higher.
And the election is coming closer and closer and closer.
Yeah, and they met with Taubman and Keller, and then we had, we and the newspaper, the editors and reporters met to discuss the story, and Bill Keller decided to hold it. And then the election, so he decided to not run it before the election, and then after the election...
I mean, do you think it could have changed the election? I mean, explain the nut of your revelation.
Basically, the story was that we found out that the U.S. was spying on Americans, the NSA was spying on Americans electronically, listening to their phone calls, international phone calls, back and forth with people overseas, and gathering doing lots of data mining on their phone and email, and also getting the content of their email, and doing that without court approval. And they were going around the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, which had been set up specifically for that purpose of providing secret warrants for spying on, for eavesdropping on spies and terrorists, or suspected spies and terrorists. And the government had decided to go around the law, go around the courts, and not tell anyone else that they were doing that except a couple hand-picked people in Congress who were like the chairman of the intelligence committees. And they were keeping this secret from everyone so they could do it on a vast scale. And we believed that what the people who talked to us about it believed that it was unconstitutional. And that's why we were pursuing it.